we have finished our study of Hilchos Yom Tov, and the next thing is Hilchos HaMoed. HaMoed Shem Hayamim Sheben Rishon LePesach L'Shvi'i Sheben Rishon Shel Chag L'Shmini. HaMoed are the days that are between the first and the seventh day of Pesach, and between the first day of Chag of Sukkot and the eighth day, Shmini Atzeres or Simchas Torah. Mutrין b'chol melacha min Torah. And the Torah says they are permitted to do all melacha from Torah law. Shachakhamim Asrом b'miktzas malachos. But the Chachamim prohibited a few malachos. And on this idea that the melacha on HaMoed is mutter min Torah and only the Chachamim prohibited, there is a very, very long Beis Yosef. He brings that this is the opinion of Tosfos in the second parak of Chagiga, the Rosh, in the beginning of Moed Katan, and other Rishonim. However, there are many other Rishonim that say there is a Torah prohibition on doing melacha on HaMoed. And it can be looked at in two ways. The most common way of saying it is there is a Torah prohibition on doing melacha, and the Torah gave it to the Chachamim to say which melachas would be prohibited and which melachas would be permitted. According to the Ramban, there are certain melachos that are prohibited min Torah and HaMoed, and an additional set of some melachos were prohibited midrabbanan on HaMoed. All right? This idea, and of course the Ramban, the Rashba, and many other, the Talmidim of the Ramban, and the Mukei Yosef, and so on, go along with the Ramban's understanding of it. So there are three sets of ways of understanding the prohibition of melacha on HaMoed, and they come out in certain aspects of machlokas, primarily between the Sephardim and Ashkenazim on this, that the Rambam, by the way, says that there is no prohibition from the Torah from HaMoed, so there are Sephardim that hold that as well, but primarily it is the Ashkenazi position that becomes that HaMoed is mutter min Torah, and most Sephardim hold it's asur min Torah, but the Chachamim gave it over, the Torah gave it over to the Chachamim to decide which things would be asur and which things would be mutter. And this comes out whether you say the os, tefillin are an os, and Yom Tov is an os. If HaMoed, it is the prohibition of melacha that creates the os, the sign nature of Yom Tov, or Shabbos. And when you have the os of Shabbos or the os of Yom Tov, you do not need the os of tefillin. You don't need the sign of tefillin. So those poskim that hold that there is no prohibition min Torah of melacha on HaMoed say one should wear tefillin on HaMoed because there's no sign. Those poskim that hold that there is, in one way or another, either according to the Ramban or according to the others, there is a Torah prohibition of melacha on HaMoed, then they say you do not wear tefillin. There are several nafkaminot to this. For instance, do you have to use up all your vacation time not to work on HaMoed? If it's a Torah prohibition doing work on HaMoed, then you have to use up all your vacation time not to work on HaMoed. If it's not a Torah prohibition, right, then you have to wear tefillin and you can work on HaMoed. Anyway, we will see more of this as we go on. Afal gav de lilfe lahu mikראי tuva. Even though the Torah continues, we learn the prohibition of melacha on HaMoed from many, many different pasukim. Asmechtos בעלמא נינהו. None they their asmechta. The rabbis are leaning their words upon what they saw in the Torah. Aval Ikran ela einan eino ela medrabbanan. But the principal prohibition is only rabbinic. Hilchach Therefore, Tiru, the Chachamim permitted a certain number of things to be done in Chol Moed. The first one is davar ha'aved, something that will cause a loss. פירוש, what does this mean? שהוא האבד, that it will be lost. אם לא יעשינו, if you don't do it. Meaning, if I don't do this, I will lose money that I currently have. Whether this includes, if I don't do this, I won't make money is an entirely different shaila, right? Loss of profit is not the same as loss of capital.
Is loss of job considered the same as loss of capital?
I would think yes. V'hitiru kol tzarkei rabim, anything that everyone needs, even though it might be a lot of work. It used to be that people would go out and fix the roads. So fixing roads in Chol Moed was a thing that was done because no one's doing their own personal work, so we can get a lot of people out there to do it. Ve'afilu tzarkei yachid im eino masei uman, or anything that an individual does that it doesn't require any specific talent, right? There are things that if you know how to do it, you go, oh, this is really easy. But if you don't know how to do it, it's like impossible. Like I know lots of things like this. Like think about tying the knots on tefillin. For a sofer that knows how to do it, it takes him 30 seconds to tie the knot on the tefillin. For someone who's looking in a book, trying to figure out how to do it, it takes him 3 hours to get it, and then even then it's not right. Right? But that's a masei uman. It's a professional knows how to do this. And it's different. There are some things, by the way, that anyone can do, but they can't do it the same way. They can't do it as well. For instance, anyone can sew a seam. Not anyone can sew a straight seam. Right? Anyone can take a needle and run it through 2 pieces of cloth and run it back. Right? That's something that anyone can do. However, to make it straight is not something that anyone can do. Making it straight would be masei uman, but if you're not a seamstress or a tailor, right, and you want to put back your button on it, yeah, you can do that because you know how to do it. Will it be as neat and straight and so on as if someone else does? Maybe not. But as long as you're not a professional or especially talented at it, you can probably do it on Chol Moed if it's something you need. V'hitiru kol tzarkei HaMoed, and anything you need for Yontif, you're allowed to do. For instance, I can cook, right? I can, whatever it is that I need for Yontif. There is an exception to this, meaning I'm not supposed to harvest my field. I want wheat, and there's wheat in my field. Anything that's done outside the house, we don't necessarily apply this to. Ve'afilu dvarim asurim hitiru b'shvil poel im ein lo ma yochal. And all the things that are prohibited, if there is a worker that does not have money to buy food, right? Every day he works and he buys what he and his family need to eat that day, he is allowed to work on Yontif in any way that he needs to, and we're allowed to give him work, right? Meaning, I wouldn't do this, I'm not allowed to do this, but this guy, it's mutter for him. If I don't give him the job, he's going to have a problem. He's not going to have what he needs for Yontif. So therefore, I'm allowed to hire him to do something that I'm not allowed to do because it's mutter for him to do. V'hineni misader osam tchila. V'hineni misader osam. And I will arrange all of these things. Tchila avar dvarim shebegufo. First I'll talk about things that are in and of themselves. Ve'achar kach dvarim hatzrichim lo. Then are the things that you need. Binyanei achila. Food, drink. V'achar kach hatzrichim lo l'shar tashmishin. And then after that, the things you need for other things. V'davar ha'aved. Things that would be lost. Binyan karka, things concerning land, whether watering fields, and so on. V'davar ha'aved, betalush, things that would be lost that are separated from the ground. Umasa umatan, buying and selling. Ubinyan, building. Melacha's hedyot, ordinary people's work. V'tzarkei rabim, public works. The ksiva, kanisa, nashim, v'tachshitehem, writing on Chol Moed, whether it's mutter or not, and women and their jewelry, hesped, eulogies, the kriya, tearing kriya, the kvuras mace, burying the dead, the havra, the sudas havra that we give a person when after the burial, vidine avelus, haregel, the chol HaMoed, and the halachas of mourning on Chol HaMoed, and so on. All right. Taf Kuf Lamed Aleph. Ein megalchin b'moed. This is clearly a rabbinic thing, that you are not allowed to get a haircut on Chol HaMoed. Ve'atam shelo likanes l'moed kashu minuval. And the reason why the Chachamim prohibited it is you shouldn't enter Yantif when you're disheveled, Menuval is more than that. Disgusting, פירוש, אם היה יכול לגלח במועד, if you could get your haircut in Chol HaMoed, לא היה חושש לגלח ערב מועד. Then you wouldn't get a haircut Erev Yantiv, meaning I want to work every bit I can before Yantiv begins. I want to get in every stroke of work. V'nimtza nichnas l'moed menuval, so you enter Yantiv when you don't look good. U'mitzvah kol adam l'galeach kodem moed. It is a mitzvah to get properly groomed before Yantiv, lichvod hamoed, to honor the Yantiv. Remember, there is in general, you're supposed to wear nicer clothes on Yantiv than you do on Shabbos. Yantiv is very special. Because you're not supposed to shave on moed. Therefore, you should be careful. You will be careful to get your haircut, your beard trim before Chol HaMoed. For Rabbeinu Tam פירוש, Rabbeinu Tam says, "Kevan shezeyu atam im kavar galach kodem HaMoed." Because this is the reason, if you cut your hair before Yantif, mutar l'gleach b'moed, then you can shave it. For people that shave, you could shave again on Chol HaMoed, or you could get another haircut, right? The Kohen Gadol, he says, used to get his haircut, like every day or something. And Kohanim from the Mishmaros, before their Mishmar started the Voda, they had to get their haircut. V'kash me'od lahatir, and it's very difficult to be mati this. V'gam eino nira, ken, and it also doesn't appear this way. Mitoch HaGemara, from the Gemara itself. V'im eisa havele lepotra behedya, and if it would be permitted, the Gemara should have permitted it explicitly. It shouldn't have been that we have to go out. Hanech ditznan, like they taught, ve'elu megalchin, ki hechi de ka'amar gabe kibus. Just like they should have asked who can get haircuts and who can't, just like they do concerning who can wash their clothes. In general, washing clothes, at least in the time of until washing machines were invented, was prohibited in the Chol HaMoed. I'm not sure it's prohibited anymore in the Chol HaMoed, but the minhag is to try and avoid it. And most people have enough clothing nowadays that if they wash their clothing before Yantif, they'll have enough clothing for all of Yantif. Mi she'ein lo ela chaluk echad muter lechabes b'moed. The Gemara says specifically that someone who only has one shirt, one set of clothing, is allowed to wash them on Yantif. Mishum dafilu im kavse kodem hamoed hu chozer mislachlech. Even though he washed his one Yantif or Shabbos shirt before Shabbos or Yantif, then it can get dirty on Yantif itself. People have been known to spill things on their shirts as they're eating their nice Shabbos meals. It's been known to happen. So too, the Gemara should have explained what the heter is, if there were such thing. That if you did get your haircut before Chol HaMoed, that you can continue doing so on Chol HaMoed. V'od mi yodea im gilach kodem moed, and who knows whether he trimmed his beard or cut his hair before Chol HaMoed. Tekahai gavna ka'amar Gemara al hai deboy misha abda lo aveda be'erev moed. The Gemara asked this. Someone lost something Erev Yentif of value, and so they go running around looking for it all Erev Yentif, and they didn't have time to get a haircut. In mutar l'gugleach b'moed, are they now allowed to get a haircut on Chol HaMoed? Mipnei shehaya anus, because it was out of their control. Shelo haya lo panai l'galeach kodem moed. They were looking for their lost prime bull that's worth $50,000 that got away in Ir Yamim and is wandering the streets, and he's afraid it might come to a bad end. Right? Who knows whether he had time before Chol HaMoed to get a haircut? V'kamar mi yodea shaya anus. Who knows these anus? Hilchos nira she'ein lahatir ela la'osam meforish behedya. Therefore, it appears that we only allow people to get a haircut. Those that the Gemara explicitly said were allowed to get a haircut on Chol HaMoed. And who does the Mishnah and the Gemara say is allowed to get a haircut on Chol HaMoed? Mish yatsa mi beis hashviya, someone that was held captive. They were kidnapped, and they were being held for ransom. They couldn't get a haircut before Yentiv. He asked the people that had kidnapped him, "Will you let me out? It's Erev Sukkos. Will you let me out? Erev Shavuos. Will you let me out so that I can go to the barber? I promise I'll come back after I get the haircut." And they go, "No, I just don't understand it." By the way, as an aside, Rav Maimon, who was the first Secretary General of the Mizrahi and traveled throughout Tsarist Russia, recruiting people for Zionism. And when he would go to a town, a shtetl, a village, he would speak on Shabbos about various Zionistic ideas from the Torah and so on. And this was illegal to do such a thing in Tsarist Russia, but the Tsarist police would wait until Motzi Shabbos to arrest him, because they knew he wasn't going anyplace. So they'd wait to Motzi Shabbos to arrest him, and then the shtadlanim, the people with some connections in town, would work for a few days to get him released. He'd go to the next town, and in the next town he would also talk about Zionist ideas on Shabbos, and the Tsarist police would arrest Motzi Shabbos. The Turks also arrested him at the beginning of the First World War, before they shipped him out of Eretz Yisrael, and he spent the First World War in the United States. And they allowed him as a Rav to go to Chol on Shabbos, and as long as he promised to come back to the prison, they would allow it. And those that know the story of the Black Sabbath, when the British arrested the leaders of the Yishuv, I think it's 1947, 46, I don't remember exactly the year, but it was Shabbos morning, very early in the morning, they arrested the leaders of the Yishuv, and Rav Maimon was one of them. And he grabbed his chair, his armchair, and said he'd never been Mechalel Shabbos in his life. But the British picked him up in the chair and took him, put him in their paddy wagon, I guess, and they drove him all the way to what is now the Gaza Strip, and then back to the prison near Ramla, and it was driven from place to place all Shabbos long. And he talks about the difference between the way the British treated him with Shabbos, and the way the enlightened British, he says, and the way the Turks and the Russians treated it. But anyway, if you're being held in prison by these people, held captive, then they let you out, and you didn't have time. Even if it's Jews they're holding you, and they would allow him to get a haircut. Because he's captured, he's in prison, he's got tzoros. He can't think about, I really should get my haircut now. mim. And so too, someone that was in harem in the earlier days, shelo haya yechol galeach. Someone that's in harem isn't allowed to get their haircut. Shahare hu aser b'tiglachas. The kagon she'tiru lo kodem regel. And they released him from the nidui before Yantiv. The hal yom shloshim b'regel shelo haya yechol galeach kodem she'ein nidui pachos mishloshim yom. And nonetheless, he couldn't. The 30th day of the harem fell on Chol HaMoed, and he couldn't get his haircut before, because even though he was released, nidui always lasts for at least 30 days. So therefore, it continues until Chol HaMoed. So the first time he could get his haircut is in Chol HaMoed, so that would be allowed. Aval im nishar b'nidui shelo bikesh she'atiru lo. He was in harem because he didn't bother to ask to be released. It was more than 30 days. Uberego bikesh. On Chol HaMoed, he says, you know what, I'd like to be released. V'atiru lo, and they say, all right, you agree to our conditions, we release you from the harem. Lav anosu. He's not anos at this point. Ve'enu yachol l'galeach. He can't ask to shave because he should have done it before Yantif, right? Shouldn't have waited until Chol HaMoed. V'ken mishin nadar shelo l'galeach. V'nishal al nidro b'regel. So too, someone that took a vow, took a Nazirite vow, they're not going to cut their hair, right? And on Chol HaMoed, they ask to be released from their vow. Kagon shelo matzah misha matir lo kodem regel. There was no beis din that he could go to, or no chacham that was of the stature that he could release someone from a vow by himself that was around before Yantif. Avalim matzah below nishal lo yahave. Lo. But if there was someone and he didn't bother to go to ask before Yantif and waited until Chol HaMoed, then he can't shave. Someone that came from abroad and the plane landed, 2 o'clock, Erev Yantif, and by the time he gets his luggage and gets home, there's no way for him to get a haircut. This is where he went to make money, or lehitasher, become wealthy. If he's only going as a tourist, lo yigaleach, the lav anusu. He can't because he's not considered honest. Meaning, I have to make money, so I have to travel to do these things. Then you come home Erev Yantif, we understand. If I'm going because I want to see, the Louvre, there are all sorts of cultural things in France they have to see, and I wanted to stay in the last minute, tough. You could have come home a day earlier, right? Had time to properly get ready for Yantif. You didn't do that. That's your problem. It's not our problem. V'raivad pirush afilu ta'ayel da'amrinan lo yigaleach dav k'me'eretz Yisrael l'chutz la'aretz. The Ravid says when it talks about tourism, it's only if you went from Eretz Yisrael to chutz la'aretz. Aval im hakol b'chutz la'aretz. If he was in chutz la'aretz and he toured around chutz la'aretz or kol ba'aretz. Afilu halach l'tayal l'galeach. If he was in Eretz Yisrael and he went to the Golan and he came back Erev Yantif, that's mutter. Either way, it's only because there is a certain level of lack of respect of kedusha by going from Eretz Yisrael to chutz la'aretz that Chazal punished you according to the Ravid. Kat mutter l'galeach b'chol HaMoed. A child is allowed to get a haircut on Chol HaMoed. Lo shna nolad b'moed. Doesn't matter whether he was born on Yantiv. Lo shna kodem lechen. Doesn't matter before. A child doesn't matter. Aval chal shiva shelo b'Shabbos erev haregel. Someone that's in Avelus, and the 7th day of Shiva falls on Shabbos, which is erev Yantif. Right? Mm-hmm. Shelo hayayachol galeach kodem. He couldn't get his haircut before because it was an avel, right? V'chol adam muter legaleach ma she'al sfas piv, and anyone can shave their mustache, afilu enu makev, even if it's not preventing you from eating. Aval ma she'etzel asfa mikan u'mikan, but what's on either side of the mouth, to both sides. Im ma'akev alav megalech. If the sides, the beard on the either side of the mouth is getting caught up in your food and it's a little bit disgusting, right? Then you can shave it. V'im lav lo galech, and if not, you can't. V'rayvid kasav she'afilu masha alasva lo galech elim kan me'akev alav. The Ravid says even the mustache you cannot shave unless it's giving you problems with eating. V'lo nihira la'avi adoni harosh zal. But this does not appear correct to my father the Rosh, and the minhag is that even without food preventing you from eating properly, one can trim one's mustache on Chol HaMoed. Everyone should have a wonderful day.